$200,000, says she doesn't know a single word of Chinese. Billionaire Garrick Thorne's arrogant bet echoed across the fancy obsidian room. His goal was to shame Kendra Powell, a 26-year-old black waitress. But Garrick did not know Kendra was saving for Harvard and had a special background in Chinatown. Facing the insult, Kendra refused to pick up the dropped bill, wanting to break the racist bias weighing on her. What legal trouble will this tense fight bring her? Can the voice of a poor waitress be strong enough to silence a room of rich billionaires? The words hung in the air like smoke. 80 guests went quiet at once. Forks stopped moving. Glasses stopped clinking. Every eye in the room turned toward one small table by the window. Kendra Powell stood there in her black apron. Her hands were steady. Her face showed nothing. But her mind had already left the room. It had traveled back 6 hours, to a cracked wooden table in a small apartment in Roxbury. Kendra's apartment sat on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. The heater in the corner made a clicking sound every night at 3:15 a.m. She knew the sound by heart. She never slept through it. That morning, she had sat at her kitchen table before her shift. A stack of language textbooks covered half the surface. Her fingers rested on one letter, printed in bold red ink. Tuition balance due, $23,450. 00. Payment deadline, Friday, 5 p.m. If she missed it, her research spot at Harvard would vanish. Years of work would disappear in one missed payment. Kendra had grown up poor in Roxbury. Her mother, Denise, worked 2 jobs and still could not pay every bill. Denise cleaned office buildings at night. She sold hair products on weekends, just to cover rent. Kendra remembered watching her mother fall asleep at the kitchen table, still wearing her work shoes. She remembered promising herself, even as a young girl, that she would find a way out. Not just for herself, but for her mother too. Money was tight every single month. Some winters, the heat got shut off for weeks at a time. Kendra learned to do homework wrapped in 2 blankets, a flashlight propped against a stack of books. But life gave Kendra one strange gift. At age 10, a neighbor took her to a small restaurant in Chinatown called Jia Hoa. The owner was an old man named Lin Guahong. Everyone called him Old Man Lin. He watched Kendra do her math homework at a corner table one evening. He asked her a question in English. She answered fast and clear. From that day, Old Man Lin let her stay after school. He fed her dumplings and taught her to read tax forms. By age 14, she could translate complex documents for his small business. But Old Man Lin gave her something bigger than skills. He taught her Mandarin, not simple tourist phrases, real Mandarin, with the smooth tones of the Jiangnan region, where his own father had been born. Words carry weight, he told her once. Learn them well, and no one can take them from you. Old Man Lin never had children of his own. His wife had passed away years before Kendra ever walked through his door. In many ways, Kendra became the daughter he never had. His own daughter figure, in spirit at least, was a young woman named Mei Ling, who helped run the front counter. Mei Ling treated Kendra like a little sister from the very first week. The 2 girls studied together at the same corner table for years. Old Man Lin taught Kendra to write formal letters in Chinese. He taught her to read old receipts and shipping records. Slowly, without either of them noticing, he was preparing her for a much bigger world. She had never forgotten that lesson. Now, 10 years later, she carried 2 lives inside her. By day, she balanced trays and poured water at the Obsidian Room, one of the fanciest restaurants in Boston. In her private hours, she studied language study, 1 page at a time, working toward a master's degree at Harvard. Nobody at the restaurant knew about her research. Nobody knew she could read classical Chinese contracts. To her coworkers, she was simply the quiet waitress who worked hard and never complained. That night, Kendra tied on her black apron and walked into the dining room. The tuition bill sat folded in her back pocket, a silent weight she carried every hour. She had no idea her whole life was about to collide with it in front of 80 strangers. The Obsidian Room glowed with soft gold light. Crystal glasses caught the candle flames. Waiters moved between tables like dancers, careful and silent. At table 4 sat Garrick Thorne, founder of Thorne Capital, a hedge fund worth over $400 million. He wore a fitted blue suit and a heavy gold ring on his pinky finger. His silver hair was slicked back, perfectly in place. Garrick had built his fortune the hard way, or so he liked to tell people. In truth, his father had handed him his first $10 million. Garrick simply multiplied it, using sharp gut feelings and even sharper elbows. He believed the world worked on one simple rule. Money decided who deserved respect. Everyone without money, in his mind, existed to serve people who had it. He was not cruel by accident. He was cruel on purpose and proud of it. He called it being efficient. He called it protecting standards. Deep down, it was simply scorn for anyone he saw as beneath him. That night, Garrick spent over $300,000 a year at the Obsidian Room alone. Staff treated him like royalty. Nobody dared question him. Not once, not ever. Across from him sat Mr. Chun, a Taiwanese billionaire, and the head of a clean energy technology company. Beside Chun sat his young helper, and near him stood Simon Vance, the restaurant's hired interpreter for the evening. The two men were close to finalizing a merger deal worth $150 million. But the negotiation had slowed. Every phrase needed translation. Every clause needed careful review. Garrick was losing patience. When Kendra approached, with a water pitcher, Garrick snapped his fingers at her, loud and sharp. He pulled a $50 bill from his wallet, rolled it into a ball, and dropped it on the floor near her feet. "I need someone who actually uses her brain," he said loudly. "Not just a girl who can carry plates and mumble broken English." The table went silent. Kendra's stomach tightened, but her spine stayed straight. She did not bend down. She did not reach for the money. Mr. Chun had grown up in a small fishing village before building his technology company from nothing. He remembered what it felt like to be looked down on by wealthier men. Watching Garrick humiliate a waitress reminded him painfully of his own younger years. He said nothing yet, but his jaw tightened. He set down his chopsticks and folded his hands, watching the scene unfold with careful, quiet attention. Garrick smiled, pleased by her stillness. He turned to the table, raising his voice for the whole room to hear. $200,000, he said, tapping his gold pen on the tablecloth. "Says she doesn't know a single word of Chinese." He scribbled the number onto the back of a leather menu and slapped it on the table. "One wrong word, and she walks out of here with nothing," he announced. "But if she translates Mr. Chin's next sentence perfectly, this check is hers." At nearby tables, guests leaned in, whispering behind their napkins. Some looked embarrassed. A few looked entertained, as if this were simply dinner theater. Nobody stood up. Nobody said a word in protest. A young couple near the window exchanged an uneasy glance. The man opened his mouth, as if to speak, then thought better of it, and looked back down at his plate. In rooms like this, silence was safer than standing out. Mr. Chin frowned, sensing the ugly tone behind the challenge. Simon Vance, the official interpreter, wiped sweat from his forehead. He waved his hand at Kendra, silently telling her to step back and stay out of it. But Kendra did not move. From the kitchen doorway, Chef Vance, the head chef, glared at Kendra. He was not related to Simon Vance, but shared his cold, controlling manner. He jabbed a finger toward the ceiling camera, a silent threat. "Step forward," his eyes said, "and you're fired tonight. No restaurant in Boston will hire you after this." Kendra understood the warning completely. Losing this job meant losing her apartment by the end of the month. It meant losing her spot at Harvard forever. She had worked at the Obsidian Room for almost 2 years. Every single manager before this one had praised her work. She never called in sick. She never dropped a tray. She had built a clean record, shift after shift. Even the strictest managers had nothing bad to say about her work. Now all of that felt like it could vanish in one wrong move. She thought about her mother, still working nights across town. She thought about the move-out notice she had already seen once this year, taped to a neighbor's door. Her knees felt weak. Her heels slid back half an inch on the wooden floor. Her mind raced through every worst outcome. No job meant no rent money. No rent money meant losing the apartment. Losing the apartment meant losing her quiet corner to study at night. At the next table, a woman named Chloe laughed sharply, tapping her red fingernail against her wine glass. "Garrick, you're scaring the poor thing," she said, with a smirk. "Someone from Roxbury probably can't tell the difference between rising and falling tones." The laughter around the table stung more than the insult itself. Kendra felt her face grow hot. For one long second, she almost stepped back toward the kitchen. Then her hand brushed something beneath her collar. It was a small jade pendant, worn smooth from years of touching. Old Man Lin had placed it around her neck the day her Harvard school letter arrived. She had worn it under her uniform every single shift since. She remembered the exact day he gave it to her. It had been raining outside the restaurant, the kind of soft spring rain that made the streets shine under the streetlights. Kendra had run through the door, waving her school letter above her head, unable to speak clearly through her excitement. Old Man Lin had read it twice, his hands shaking slightly, before pulling the small jade pendant from his pocket. It had belonged to his mother, carried all the way from a small village outside Suzhou decades earlier. He placed it around Kendra's neck, without a word, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. His voice rose in her memory now, warm and steady, speaking in Mandarin. Jade does not need to shout to prove its worth against clay, he had told her. You carry learning in your mind. No one can price that away from you. Something in her chest calmed. This was not just about tuition money anymore. This was about every person who had ever been judged by their apron instead of their mind. She thought of her mother, working double shifts without complaint. She thought of every waitress dismissed, as simple, every worker seen, as less than human, because of a uniform. Kendra straightened her shoulders. She stepped over the crumpled $50 bill, without looking down. She walked directly to table 4, stopping in front of Garrick Thorne. Then she turned to Mr. Chun and gave a small, respectful bow. Mr. Chun, she said, speaking in perfect, smooth Mandarin. It would be my honor to help review your agreement today. The accent was not textbook Mandarin. It carried the exact soft tones of Jiangnan, the same tones Mr. Chen's own grandmother had used. Mr. Chen's teacup froze halfway to his lips. He set it down, with a sharp clink against the saucer. His eyes widened in complete surprise. Every fork at the nearby tables stopped moving. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. A waiter near the kitchen door stood frozen, a tray balanced on one hand. Even the soft background music from the piano in the corner seemed to fade into silence. Somewhere behind the bar, a glass clinked once, then went quiet. The air conditioning hummed low above the tables, the only sound left in the entire dining room. Chloe, the woman who had laughed earlier, sat with her mouth slightly open. Her wine glass hovered halfway to her lips, completely forgotten in her hand. Simon Vance shot up from his chair, nearly knocking it backward. He pointed a shaking finger at Kendra. This is absurd, he shouted. She's a cheating. She's trying to sabotage $150 million deal. Mr. Chun raised one hand, and Simon fell silent immediately. The billionaire studied Kendra with sharp, curious eyes. Then he asked her a question, an old riddle about the rivers of southern China. Water can carry a boat, he said in Mandarin, or water can sink a boat. In business, what plays the same role as a great river's current? Kendra paused only a moment. Then she answered clearly, connecting the old proverb to something modern. She explained how cash flow worked exactly like a river's current in Section 7.3 of his draft contract. Her Chinese financial words was so precise that even Simon Vance, the official interpreter, looked completely lost. Mr. Chen leaned back in his chair, a slow smile forming on his face. Simon Vance had worked as a business translator for nearly 15 years. He held a fancy paper from a language school in New York. He had built his entire career on being the smartest person in any room full of businessmen. Watching a waitress beat him in front of his most important client felt like the ground shifting under his feet. His face turned a deep shade of red. His hands curled into tight fists at his sides. He had taken this job with Garrick for one simple reason. Garrick paid him extra, under the table, to keep certain details unclear during negotiations. Tonight, that deal was falling apart in real time. Near the kitchen door, a fellow waiter named Tyrese watched the whole scene unfold, his tray forgotten in his hands. He had worked beside Kendra for over a year and never once suspected she spoke another language, let alone one as difficult as Mandarin. He caught her eye for just a second and gave a small, steady nod. It was a quiet signal, one that said simply, I see you, and I am on your side." That tiny gesture gave Kendra one more ounce of courage to keep standing tall. Garrick Thorne felt the deal slipping from his control. He shot to his feet, his gold ring cracking hard against the table. "Miss Powell," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "If you're inventing details to ruin this deal, I will sue you for stealing business secrets. You'll see the inside of a courtroom before you ever see Harvard's gates." Nearby, the Boston police chief, also a dinner guest that night, rested his hand near his belt. He watched Kendra with open suspicion. The police chief's name was Daniel Reyes. He had attended dozens of these charity dinners over the years, always careful not to upset major givers like Garrick. Tonight, something about the scene made him uneasy, though he could not yet say why. He studied Kendra's calm look closely. Something about her steady voice did not match the picture of a con artist. Years of watching liars in questioning rooms had taught him to trust his gut feelings. The pressure in the room grew heavier. Kendra felt eyes from every direction, judging her, doubting her, waiting for her to fail. But she thought of the jade pendant beneath her collar. She thought of every tax form she had translated for Old Man Lin since she was 14 years old. She did not back down. Mr. Chen asked Kendra to read directly from page 14 of the digital contract. His young helper held out a tablet showing the full document. Simon Vance lunged forward, trying to grab the tablet first. Mr. Chen pushed his hand away and passed the device straight to Kendra. She scanned the dense characters carefully, her eyes moving line by line. Then her stomach dropped. The original Chinese text clearly stated that ownership of the green technology would remain with Mr. Chen's Taiwanese partners. But Simon Vance's English translation said something completely different. Kendra read the clause out loud, slowly, so everyone at the table could follow along. She pointed to one certain character buried in a long paragraph. It changed the entire meaning of the sentence. "This word here," she said calmly, "means total transfer. Not licensed use. Not shared rights. Full transfer to any buyer Thorne Capital chooses." His version secretly gave Thorne Capital full rights to transfer that same technology to any third party, without limits. It was a hidden trap worth $42 million. Mr. Chen's helper pulled up the original filing on his laptop, checking every line against Kendra's translation. His hands moved fast across the keyboard. Sweat had started to form on his brow. 2 minutes later, he looked up at Mr. Chen and gave a small, grim nod. Kendra was right. The trap was real, and it had almost worked. Simon Vance screamed that Kendra was lying. Garrick Thorne slammed his fist on the table, shouting that the deal was canceled and demanding security throw Kendra out immediately. Mr. Chen could read some basic legal English, but not complicated technical terms. Now, with Kendra's careful explanation of the word trick hidden in the contract, everything became clear. He realized he had almost lost his family's most valuable technology in a single signature. Mr. Chen turned to Garrick Thorne with a look of pure, quiet scorn. He stood and spoke, this time in clear, confident English. "This deal is over," he said. "And Mr. Thorne, you owe this young woman $200,000. She just saved what little honor you have left before the police arrive for international cheating." The dining room erupted in stunned whispers. Every guest turned to stare at Garrick, whose face had gone completely pale. Chloe, who had laughed at Kendra just minutes earlier, quietly set down her wine glass and looked away. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Nobody at the table met her eyes. A few guests began to clap softly, unsure at first, then louder. Within seconds, most of the dining room had joined in, applauding a waitress they had ignored just an hour before. Kendra stood still in the middle of it all, her heart pounding, hardly able to believe the sound washing over her. She had not done any of this for applause, but it felt good anyway, after everything she had carried alone for so long. Garrick had no choice. Under Mr. Chen's watchful eye, and in front of Boston's wealthiest guests, he signed a check for $200,000. He threw it onto the floor in front of Kendra, his voice shaking with fury. "You win tonight," he snarled, "but I sit on the board of Harvard's money fund. Tomorrow, your file disappears from their system." Before Kendra could respond, Chef Vance marched over and ripped the name tag from her apron. "You're fired," he barked. "And you're not getting paid for tonight's shift." Kendra bent down, picked up the check with steady fingers, and walked out into the cold Boston night. Snow fell softly around her, but her future felt anything but calm. She walked 6 blocks to the nearest bus stop, her apron still tucked under one arm. The wind cut through her thin jacket, but she barely noticed. Her mind kept replaying every second of the last hour. At a payphone near the station, she called her mother. Denise picked up on the second ring, her voice groggy with sleep. Kendra told her everything, the words tumbling out faster than she could organize them. Denise went quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. Then she simply said, "I always knew you were something special, baby." Kendra had to press her hand against her mouth to keep from crying on the street corner. Snow kept falling around the payphone booth, catching the orange glow of the streetlight above her. For a moment, the cold Boston night felt almost peaceful, despite everything that had just happened. She thought about calling Old Man Lin too, but it was already past midnight. She decided the news could wait until morning, when she could tell him in person over a warm cup of tea. She had won the battle inside the restaurant, but a much bigger fight was waiting for her, only hours away. Kendra barely slept that night. She sat awake in her small apartment, the check from Garrick resting on the kitchen table beside her tuition bill. Snow kept falling outside her window, thick and silent. She thought about calling Old Man Lin, just to hear his voice. Instead, she decided to wait until she had good news to share. She did not want to worry him before she knew how the story would end. The next morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, Kendra walked into the front office of Harvard's language department. What she saw stopped her in the doorway. Garrick Thorne sat there already, next to the department head, a stern-looking woman named Professor Whitfield. He was pressing hard, using every ounce of his financial power, trying to cancel Kendra's admission before she even arrived. Garrick had spent the entire morning on the phone with university board members. He reminded each one, politely but firmly, how much money his family trust fund had donated over the years. The message was simple: cancel this girl's spot or lose future funding. Professor Whitfield looked uncomfortable, caught between pressure from a major giver and her own sense of fairness. She glanced at the door every few minutes, as if hoping someone would interrupt. Then the office door opened again. Mr. Chin walked in, flanked by his personal lawyer and 2 federal agents from the Federal Money Police. Garrick's face drained of color the moment he saw the badges. The lead agent placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of the change contract, time marks from the negotiation, and a recorded statement from Mr. Chin's helper. Every detail from the night before had already been written down. They laid out clear proof of Garrick's attempted cheating from the night before. Professor Whitfield's eyes widened as she skimmed the first page. She slowly slid her chair away from Garrick, putting distance between herself and the man she had defended minutes earlier. Mr. Chun then made a big announcement. He would fund a $2 million research program in language study at Harvard. There was only one condition. Kendra Powell had to lead the project. The room fell silent again, this time from shock instead of fear. Professor Whitfield looked between Garrick and Mr. Chun, quickly realizing which side of history she wanted to stand on. Garrick Thorne was escorted out of the building in complete shame, his face rigid with disbelief. Kendra received her official school letter that same afternoon, now as a respected scholar, not a charity case. Every insult about her skin color, her accent, and her background had just been proven wrong in the most public way possible. With her prize money finally secure, Kendra used exactly $23,450.00 to pay her full Harvard tuition. She carried the remaining amount, exactly $176,550.00, back to Chinatown. She placed it directly into Old Man Lin's hands. It was enough to pay off the mortgage on Jia Hoa restaurant completely, saving it from being sold to developers. The restaurant had quietly sheltered dozens of orphaned children over the years. Both Black and Chinese kids from the neighborhood found shelter there. They came for warm food. They stayed for a safe place to study. Old Man Lin poured Kendra a warm cup of Jiangnan tea, his hands trembling slightly with emotion. He said nothing at first, simply watching her, with proud, tearful eyes. Mei Ling stood behind him, wiping her own eyes with the corner of her apron. She had heard the whole story already, twice over, from 3 different neighbors, before Kendra even arrived. You never needed to shout, Old Man Lin finally said, to prove your worth. He reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over hers. His fingers were rough, from decades of chopping vegetables and counting coins. When you were 14, he said, I knew you would do something big one day. I just did not know it would happen in front of 80 billionaires. Kendra laughed. Through her tears, the tension of the past 2 days finally breaking loose. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders relaxed completely. Kendra smiled, holding the warm cup between her palms. Outside the restaurant window, Boston's Chinatown buzzed quietly, with evening life, string lights glowing, over the sidewalk. The story of the black waitress, who silenced a room full of billionaires, spread quickly across the city. People from every background repeated it, amazed by her calm strength. She never raised her voice once, not during the bet, not during the threats, not even during the final clash. Her power had always been quiet, patient, and completely her own. News of that night spread fast through Boston. A guest at the dinner had recorded part of the clash on their phone. Within 2 days, the video had reached millions of viewers online. Reporters called Kendra's apartment, asking for interviews. Local news vans parked outside Jia Hoa restaurant, hoping to catch a glimpse of the now-famous waitress. Kendra turned down almost every request, choosing instead to focus on her studies. Her mother, Denise, finally got to quit one of her 2 jobs. Kendra insisted on it, using part of her research stipend to help cover the difference. For the first time in years, Denise slept through the entire night. She woke up the next morning and made pancakes, just because she finally had the time. Months later, Kendra stood at the front of a small class at Harvard, teaching her first group of older students. She spoke about language, about power, and about the hidden meaning buried inside every word. She often told her students one simple story from her own life. A story about a rolled-up $50 bill, left on a restaurant floor, and a young woman who chose not to bend down for it. One student once asked her if she had been scared that night. Kendra thought about it for a long moment before answering. Terrified, she admitted. But being scared never stopped me from doing what felt right. She told them fear was not something to erase completely. Fear was simply proof that something mattered enough to fight for. The trick was learning to act anyway, even while your knees felt weak. Her students often left that lecture quieter than usual, turning the idea over in their minds. A few years later, more than one of them would repeat her words to their own students. She reminded them that dignity is never something you can measure in dollars. It lives in the choices people make when everyone else expects them to stay silent. On weekends, Kendra still worked a few hours at Jia Hoa, not for the money, but for the company. She helped Old Man Lin with the books, just like she had as a teenager. Mei Ling often joined them, the 3 of them laughing over dumplings until closing time. Sometimes, tourists would recognize her from the video and ask for a photo. Kendra always smiled politely and agreed, though she never understood the fuss. To her, she had simply done what felt right in one very long, very tense moment. Garrick Thorne's hedge fund collapsed, within the year, buried under cheating reviews and lawsuits from former clients. Several major investors pulled their money out within the first month alone. His wife filed for divorce shortly after the scandal broke, taking their 2 children with her. The mansion in Beacon Hill went up for sale by early spring. Garrick moved into a small rented condo across town. His name became a quiet warning among Boston's business circles, a lesson about pride meeting its match. Old co-workers stopped returning his calls. Invitations to galas and charity dinners simply stopped arriving. Simon Vance lost his interpreting license entirely, unable to find steady work again in the money business. The secret payments from Garrick came to light during the SEC review, confirming years of quiet cheating. His good name, once trusted by the city's wealthiest clients, never recovered. Former co-workers described him afterward as a warning story, a reminder of what greed could cost a skilled worker. Chef Vance had spent 20 years building his good name at the Obsidian Room. He prided himself on running a tight kitchen, one where nobody dared step out of line. Threatening Kendra that night had simply been habit, the same tone he used with every employee. But once the video spread online, his name appeared in every article about the incident. Customers began requesting other servers, refusing to be seated in his section of the restaurant. The restaurant's owners grew nervous about the bad attention attached to his name. Humiliated by his role, that night, he quietly resigned from the obsidian room within weeks. Nobody at the restaurant spoke his name again. Mr. Chun and Kendra stayed close friends for years afterward. He often visited Jia Hoa restaurant whenever business brought him back to Boston. He always requested the same corner table. It was the exact spot where Kendra once did her childhood homework. As for Kendra, she never forgot where her strength came from. Not from a fancy degree, not from a viral story, and not from a $200,000 check. It came from an old man in Chinatown. He once looked at a 10-year-old girl. He saw something the rest of the world had missed entirely. It came from a jade pendant, worn smooth by years of quiet faith. And it came from one single decision. It took only a few seconds to make. She chose not to bend down for a crumpled bill on the floor. Some battles are won with fists. Others are won with money, or power, or connections. But Kendra Powell proved something different that night. Sometimes, the loudest victory comes from the quietest voice in the room. Years later, Jia Hoa restaurant added a small frame near the front counter. Inside sat a photo of Kendra at 14, hunched over tax forms at the corner table. Beside it sat a photo of her graduation day at Harvard. Visitors often asked Old Man Lin about the two pictures. He always gave the same simple answer, no matter how many times he told the story. "That is what patience looks like," he would say, smiling. "Give someone a chance and watch what they build." Kendra kept the jade pendant close for the rest of her life, worn smooth by decades of quiet faith. She wore it during her wedding years later. She wore it the day she became a full professor. Every time a new student walked into her class feeling small, unseen, or doubted, she remembered exactly how that felt. She made sure, every single time, that they walked out feeling seen instead. And sometimes, the person everyone underestimates is the only one holding the whole truth in their hands.